Hey, everybody. Welcome to your next session of the day. My name is Tyler Shields. I'm CMO at JupiterOne, and I have with me Erkang Zheng, who is the CEO at JupiterOne. We've decided we're going to give you a little bit of a twist. We're not going to give you the same slide presentation, straightforward approach. We've decided to do a little bit of a fireside chat and talk through some questions and problems together, Erkang and I. So we don't want you to be bored and droned on. So hopefully if you have any questions, you can email them in or send them in, and we're happy to respond to them after the event. So just by way of background, my name is Tyler. I'm the CMO here, formerly an analyst at Forrester Research, and I'm responsible for marketing as well as strategy at JupiterOne. And Erkang, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm the CEO and founder of JupiterOne. I've been a security practitioner and a former CISO for pretty much my entire career. Previously at IBM, Fidelity, and a software company called Lifomic before started JupiterOne. Well,
Great. So the topic of today's discussion is security as a basic right. Before we get into that, one of the questions I like to ask people is always what is wrong with security and what is good with security today, right? There's always a balance. InfoSec is never in a state of perfection. It can't be. It's just not ever meant to be. And so give me a couple seconds and discuss what's wrong with the state of cybersecurity today. What makes it broken, and maybe a little bit of what makes it good as well.
yeah, I'll start with the good, right? Let's make it a bit more positive, right? So I think part of it is look, with the cyber industry, we talked so much about fear and uncertainty and doubt, right? So I like to start with some good. Now, the good is that we have a lot of great products out there now that we can leverage, and we have a lot of great people that are in the cyber industry that are doing the right things and supporting it, and we're seeing good trends of security going in the right way, being more agile and nimble and engineering focused in the approaches. So a lot of those are the great trends, right? So we started to see that. But of course, there's a lot of things that are still not working, right? And I ask myself this question all the time, right? And and again, with all the good, with all the good products and good people and increase in the expertise and the workforce in cybersecurity, why is it still so broken? And why is it that we still have so many breaches that happen all the time, right? And to some extent, I think a lot of us are kind of getting numb at those events. And it's just another day, another normal thing now that somebody got breached or got attacked, and that's just the way it is. I don't think it's right. I don't think that's supposed to be, right? So I look at it this way. I think the way that we're approaching security today has some fundamental flaws. And I'll put in a couple of examples, right? So one is a lot of the organizations, right, especially younger and less mature organizations, they are too compliance focused. And being too compliance focused, it becomes that you go through the motions as check the box.
Complacent.
And at the end of the day, right.
You become very complacent as an organization,
That's
and
right.
you just do the minimum bar, and that's generally what we've seen over the years for most compliance regulations is they don't actually secure anything.
That's right. Yeah, it's just the minimum bar. That's just the baseline, and that's also that's what's kind of causing. If you see any organization recently that were breached, they're compliant, right? They were compliant and they were certified in some way, right? So it really begs the questions of what really does it mean to be compliant? Is it still meaningful anymore? Right. So I think that's one problem of the industry today. And the other problem that we don't see and we don't talk enough about, but we see the result of that, which is, look, this is a community effort. We're in this together. It's not just about your organization. It's about the entirety of the digital operations of every company, right? Because we're so connected today, right? So any organization do not operate in your own complete silo. You rely on vendors, you interact with customers, and all of those things, and it's just the weakest link, right? So we've seen this, and most recently, SolarWinds, right, and even before Target, right? So a lot of these are supply chain, third party, type of attacks that results in the breach of sort of that final target or targets across the board. So now that brings to sort of the third problem of the space today, right? Which is, with all these going on, right? So the security vendors, they tend to go after the enterprises, right? That's how they make their money, and that's how they, become, this unicorn companies or startups. But it makes those solutions too costly, difficult to use, and very costly because they're focused on the enterprises. And then on the other hand, right, the organizations has this tendency of buying the new shiny tools, which creates silos, right? And at the same time, that the vast majority of this community cannot afford them, cannot afford the right security tooling, do not have the right resources, and are not doing it right. So again, this contributes back to the previous two problems, which is compliance and community, right? So I actually think that we are in a state of cybersecurity poverty. A lot of the companies are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So a lot of this also has to come to the fact with like the free and open source tools in general. They can get you kind of the way there, or they require significant technical expertise to engineer a solution on top of them. There's no
That's
kind
right.
of super easy to use tool that just gets you where you need to be as a small company or a company that doesn't necessarily have the expertise or the dollars to spend.
Exactly. And look, let's talk about it a little bit more, right? So those free and open source tools, a lot of them are great. Actually, they work, and they are actually very helpful in the actual operations, right? But the problem with a lot of those, or the challenges with a lot of those, is they don't have great management and governance layer that supports compliance, right? Which creates this sort of mismatch and say, hey, organizations are compliance focused because to do business with the larger companies, they want these piece of paper that's signed by the auditors. And in order to do that, you have to have these, good shiny tools that can give you these check the box reports and outputs and evidence collections and all that to meet those compliance requirements. While on the other hand, if you choose to go with the open source solutions and the maybe some of these cloud native ones, they may not check those boxes so easily, right? So it creates this mismatch, and then it forces people to go to the check the box solutions rather than doing the right things. And then this community then becomes there's this huge gap between people who are investing so much in security, but still, getting breached because the attackers are focusing on the people who cannot afford it or cannot do it right.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that got me very excited to join JupiterOne last year when I did join was a statement you made publicly where you said security is a basic right, and I had never really heard that term. Like I'd never heard the term as a basic right. And when you really distill it down to what a basic right is, it comes with food and nourishment and safety, right? But in our business world, security is a basic right for other reasons, or on top of those reasons. Can you expand a little bit on what you mean by that?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll also bring out this blog post that I wrote and published just recently in the backdrop. So
while you're doing that, that blog post in particular is pretty exciting to me because it does identify the specific key points at what makes something a right, and why JupiterOne firmly believes in that is, I think, a fundamentally interesting story.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm not going to go through this blog post and read through it with you, right? But I want to point at this, and just so as a resource, right? So the audience and you guys can read this article and get more details about this a little bit later. So what I really mean by security is a basic right, right? So you talked a lot about the basic needs, right? So I look at this as a basic need for organizations, right? I like to compare an organization and the makeup of an organization to real life, like a human body, or the anatomy of an individual, and the healthcare and the wellness of an individual, right? So I look at security of an organization as the wellness of an organization, and you have to start at the very beginning, and you have to do it right from the beginning to get the most benefit and the reward long term, and the care and feeding that needs to go into it, right? So a lot of these are very actually basic kind of things, right? So have access to fundamental tools at very little to no cost, and being able to do it correctly from the beginning, right? Rather than accumulating technical debt from the beginning, right?
Yeah. It's very similar to the story I've often heard about baking security into your products right from the get-go, right? It's a similar kind of thing. If you do it properly right from the get-go, it becomes a basic right of what you do, right? It's just fundamental.
Exactly, exactly. And there's a lot of kind of similar mindset to it, right? So shift left, right, is one of them. But I think what I'm trying to preach a little bit is, a lot of those concepts have to do with kind of making security early in the process of your building the product, or development, or whatever the case. Now, I'm looking at this at a more kind of organizational business level, a fundamental level. And I'm also looking at this from a having access to the right tooling and resource level as well. And the process and how you manage security, not just picking the tools, but how you manage security and governance as a whole. So there's two things I think we need to consider, right? So one is what is the right focus, right? So understanding not just what you're doing, but why. Well, what is the outcome? Is the outcome that you're shooting for, that piece of paper that the auditor signs once a year? Or is the actual outcome, secure and less risk, and having the long-term wellness, like I keep saying that word, right? So the long-term wellness of the organization as a whole, right? And why are you doing this, right? But of course, compliance should be one of the outcomes, but not the necessarily end goal, right? I believe that compliance should not cost extra. It just should be part of the things that you're doing. It's kind of like we're paying this tax for no reason, right? And it doesn't really help you, but we have to do it. Just that's the way it's set up, and it doesn't feel right. Now the second part is, I have a lot of engineering background myself. I love working with the engineers. And, a lot of folks, we try to get security and engineering to work well together, right? So there's continued challenge there. But I would like to draw some learning from engineering, from how engineering transformed, their process from waterfall model to DevOps and Agile, continuous development, continuous deployment, continuous integration, and so on and so forth, right? And then minimize technical debt along the way from the very beginning. And I think we need to do the same for security. We need to minimize technical debt, right? So because what I've seen over and over again is that, because we are forced to check these boxes, I'm just going to do what everybody else is doing and putting solutions to check those boxes, even though I may know that down the road that it may not serve my best interests, 3-5 years down the road, which means that we're knowingly committing to technical debt at the very beginning. And there comes to a point where you've accumulated so much legacy in the organization, then all those technical debt becomes so difficult to unwind. And that's what we're seeing in many large organizations, right? So, those are the type of things. And the last part I'll mention, going back to this wellness, right, is that if you don't, start working on it and put thoughts and be mindful of this wellness, it's kind of like your health, right? If you don't take care of your body, and if you're just going at this after you're 40 or 50 and you're starting to exercise at that time, you're starting to eat well and diet and all that, it might be too late.
Yeah, and I can definitely vouch for the difficulties in that. I am I am not a picture of wellness, as my coworkers tend to get on me quite frequently about. But let me double click a little bit on that. Right, in the last year or so, wellness has become a big thing. It's important for people to stay at home to remain healthy and take care of themselves. Has is there any parallels around any of that?
Absolutely. And I was just right before uh, JupiterOne. I was at a healthcare software company, right? So Lifomic, and we actually did a lot of studies around DNAs and so on. And even before that, and this is almost 4 years ago now. Now I'll bring up another blog and I'll share with you. So here, let me bring up this article right here. So I wrote this small piece about 4 years ago and say, hey, are we doomed in the cyber pandemic, right? So at that time, I compared the state of the cybersecurity to almost like a pandemic. And well, we're sort of in one right now
Didn't Yeah, you're a
in real
little
life.
foreshadowing there, huh, Erkang?
I did not call on that one, but now I think I did a lot of comparisons to how we describe cybersecurity and digital operations and attacks and so on to all of the things in real life, right? So whether that is a physical battle or war, or whether that is a disease that we're fighting off in infections and so on and so forth, right? So, and I think there's a lot that we can draw from the learnings of real life physical world that we can apply to digital and to cyber and cybersecurity and so on. Right. So I again encourage you to give that other article a read. It's probably a 5 minute read, but call out a couple of things. Right. So if you think about sort of the pandemic that we're in right now and how are we fighting it, right? So there's contact tracing for COVID, right? That's one example. And there's the DNA sequencing of the virus, right? So there's an example. And all of those, and just not just that, right? But the past 5-10 years or so, there's a lot of focus in actual healthcare and biotech and wellness in the focus of the human body and understanding the human body and the DNA sequencing of us, right, ourselves, and all of those. To me, it really boils down to one thing, which is that understanding of us, of ourselves, right? And it's very complex, right? So the biology of an individual, of a person, is very complex, and I think to some extent the operations, if you would think about the digital operations of an organization, like the biology of that organization, it is also very complex, right? And it also changes all the time. Sort of the difference is, the genes in a human body doesn't mutate as often as the digital operations nowadays changes in an organization. But on the flip side, a digital operation in an organization is actually far less complex than a human body. And there are ways to understand it, right? So using automations and APIs and so on and so forth to understand that is sort of the equivalent of doing this DNA sequencing of a human body to understand it, right? So I think what we really need to focus on, which gets to one thing that we're not doing well as an organization or as an industry, is this understanding of ourselves.
Got it. So you've connected security being a fundamental right of every business. You've connected cyber pandemic. You've connected human and health wellness, right? And a lot of these concepts that you're bringing up are broad and theoretical concepts. So how do we as an enterprise, or how do we as a security community on a broader sense, like what's the right way to take that from the conceptual, right? The ability to say, hey, we get this as a basic right, and the organization is complex, and we have very little visibility into the active organization every day, day in and day out, with all the changes that occur. How do we actually ground this conversation in something that the audience that's listening to us today can kind of take away and run with?
Yeah, exactly. So how what can you do? How do you do it, right? So that's sort of the $1 million question here, right? So all of these are conceptually, right? So I think these all sounds great, and I'll touch on that, visibility part just one more bit, and then I'll get into sort of what do you do, right? How can you do it? Now a lot of these security tools, or we have to get down to talking about tools and people and process and so on, right? And what resource can we leverage at low cost, right? So this is going back to the basic right, approach that we're talking about, right? And what can we do to actually make this a reality for us, right? So, and again, going back to visibility, a lot of the vendors and products now talk about visibility, and it's like the new buzzword now, right? So you in marketing, I know. I tend to tell you, hey, we don't like buzzwords, so don't use buzzwords. But really, to me, right, so visibility, a lot of the products and vendors focus on the observability, right? So just seeing, hey, what's out there, and what things you have, and so on and so forth, right? And which is good, because I truly believe that we have to go back to the foundation. We have to go back to the basics. We have to start with answering the questions of, hey, what do I have? Who owns them? What is out there? How are they configured? And so on and so forth. But visibility should not stop there. It has to go beyond to understanding, right? Which is why I go back and saying, hey, DNA sequencing and all that. It's not about understanding, hey, I have this gene, but it's more about understanding how they're connected, right? So what does this little thing, this object or this entity in your operations mean, because it's connected to so many other things, right? So connecting the dots that give you that understanding, and the so what, right? Not just answer the what question, but the so what question is the more meaningful outcome. That's how you get insight into what I should do. Now, back to how we're doing it, how you should do it. And as much as I don't like talking about compliance, I'm going to use SOC 2 compliance as an example, because I think that's something that a lot of the folks can relate to, right? So that is a very industry agnostic framework that most kind of digital companies can leverage, right? So I'm going to bring up yet another block, right? So this is the third block here. So this is no slides, but all blocks. And this third one right here, a while ago that we talked about, hey, how do we get SOC 2 compliance on a shoestring budget, right? So it's doable. And again, I encourage you to go through this a little bit. And the sort of the gist of this is there are a lot of open source toolings and cloud native toolings that are out there. And you can get some of these with AWS native ones, or so on and so forth. And a couple of things to consider, right? So open source and cloud native. And second is that you might already have a lot of these that you're using in your organizations. The existing tooling from your DevOps teams and engineering teams, GitHub or Bitbucket and Jira can actually be used as a security tool. We do that ourselves internally. We use that, like, for example, right? So, one of the requirements says, hey, you should have regular security team and security committee meetings, and you should keep track of that, and you should provide evidence that, security is part of the topic, and so on and so forth, right, being discussed. Well, guess what we do? We just created a simple GitHub project and say, hey, every time we have a security team stand up, and we'll just have the person responsible create a 10-line little write-up on the outcome of that discussion. And everybody who's on that meeting just go approve that pull request. And there you go. There's a record, right? And that record can then be consolidated and ingest into JupiterOne, or we use that as an example, as a central place to produce the evidence with these automation, right? You write up a simple query and you align that with that compliance requirement. Every time the auditor wants something, is already there, right? That's just one example of using existing tooling. And you can use cloud native tooling, you can use open source tooling, and all of these can then be consolidated into one place, right? And we previously talked about a lot of these solutions are available. They just don't have a great reporting backend to fulfill some of the compliance needs and the tracking and the reporting needs, right? And that's why this is not a commercial, but I have to mention that, we are, launching JupiterOne for free, right? As the very kind of base tier, so that you can do this, right? So you can leverage all of these and have one place that aggregates all of these and provides that for, reporting and so on. And not only that, right? So now that's one. And the second part is that the going back to that visibility and understanding point that I was trying to make, right? Is you really need a kind of a knowledge base that describes your operations, right? So now imagine all of these things I just mentioned, right? So your security controls, your open source tools, your cloud native things, your DevOps and engineering stuff, they all come together into this central knowledge base, which again is free if you use JupiterOne, right? And the central knowledge base that can describe and connect the dots and build a graph of how things are connected automatically using APIs and integrations. Right? Then that becomes your whole package. And you get that whole package basically at no cost or very little cost for a early stage, simple organization.
Yeah, the key here is first of all free, right? We believe that it needs to be free, but that you're not going to build technical debt from day one of a small organization. You're able to grow your security program, grow your security stack in some ways to match the business as you grow. And that's kind of the key to making sure that security is a basic right from inception to eventual old age of a business, right? So, I find it very interesting that that tracks along. Do you have any closing statements or remarks? I know we're bumping up against time here before we move on.
Great point to summarize and sum that up, right? Is that and doing it this way allows you to take that engineering approach, that agile and nimble approach, and small improvements, small changes. So you are not married to expensive tools at the beginning, and you have a foundational platform that you can grow with, right? So without having to accumulate technical debt starting from day one, right? So I think that's really what my message to everyone here is, right? Is do it right, make compliance a natural outcome. Don't focus on that, but do it right and do it with an engineering and automation first mindset. And the last one I will sum up with is this security manifesto that we put out, and we believe in it as an organization. I believe in it as a practitioner, and this is I would probably wrap up everything with is this message right here.
Yeah, so that's a great summary. It's a great piece on the end that we can kind of bookend this discussion with. For the audience and the listeners that have made it this far, all of the blogs that Erkang has referenced are on JupiterOne.com/blog, and then what you see here is securitymanifesto.net. Please feel free to check all that out. Erkang and myself are both only an email away. We also have a community Slack that you can join and get us both on there as well. So we're looking forward to seeing you, and let's make security basic right for everyone across the board. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.